Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and today we'll be taking a look at the lore and story learnings from Overwatch's short story Thoughtless Gods. By Andrew Robinson, starring Hammond, with a few surprising extras. We discover a bunch about Hammond's origins, the Horizon Lunar Colony and the Apes up there, Lucheng Interstellar, space in the Overwatch world, and what the Junkers are up to, and whether they could be leaving Australia at some time very, very soon. I'll be going through all of the Overwatch lore talking points and interesting bits of the story, along with a little light speculation on what new things we may have learned from it too. Now, suffice to say, this contains massive spoilers for the story. It is from Heroes Ascendant. This one is actually on the Overwatch website. You can always read the PDF first if you like, so if you have already read it, timecodes are in the description if you want to skip ahead to analysis and thoughts, but if not, let's quickly summarise the story. In Thoughtless Gods, we join the Junkers, led by Junker Queen, with Hammond and Merry of the Tinkers in tow, as they continue clearing up an Omnic warband that came a little bit too close to Junkertown. Following the revelation of what Junkrat's hidden treasure in Junkertown was in a friendly rivalry, it's only been described as the Queen's pet project, but at the end of that story, the Junker Queen asked Hammond if he can make it fly. So the Junkers are on the lookout and scavenging for tech to repair some massive anti-gravity thrusters, presumably towards getting whatever this thing is airborne. Breaking into what is revealed to be a war room in the wreckage of a bunch of Omnics that came too close to the Junkers, Hammond discovers that they have been monitoring Null Sector's worldwide attack, which he discovers the scope of, as well as the cities that Null Sector are attacking. Sharing this with the Queen, Hammond sees that Lucheng in China is one of the places under attack and sees Lucheng Interstellar's offices and logo. This gives him a flashback to his early years on the Horizon Lunar Colony, the experiments that were run on him and his hamster family by Lucheng's scientists. Smashing the monitor subconsciously in anger, Hammond realises he can find both components for the Queen's project and perhaps some answers to his past in one location, and that is Lucheng. He declares he's heading off alone, leaving a puzzled Queen in his wake. Arriving in Lucheng, Hammond navigates his way to the tower's night market area through the ruins of a Null Sector attack. Using his mech's abilities to distract the guards, Hammond ascends to the top 10 floors of the building where Lucheng Interstellar is based. Navigating through air ducts as he puts his mech into automatic mode, Hammond again has flashbacks to his time on the Horizon Lunar Colony, where he planned his escape from his cage, spent time hiding in air vents, teaching himself engineering, tinkering and many other things, as well as meeting a young Winston. At this point, Winston is less intelligent than Hammond and can't speak, and the two form a slow but firm friendship. Back in the present, Hammond breaks into the control centre, trying to find the components he needs, and as he searches through databases and data points, he's confronted by Dr. Chow, the main scientist who experimented on him up on the Lunar Colony, and now head, it seems, of Lucheng Interstellar. Refusing to address him by his name and addressing him as Specimen 8 as she knows him, Chow recalls Hammond's life on the colony in spite of his threatening. Using base security feeds to show different areas of the moon, she discusses the challenges Lucheng have had in retaking the lunar base from the Apes since that fateful day, who, in her words, after the rebellion, are damned clever and innovating themselves. Finding what he needs in Lucheng's database, Hammond also flashbacks to the day he left the moon, and the day of the rebellion, and seeing Winston leaving, or so he thought, without him. Snapping back to the present, Hammond narrowly dodges being shot with a taser by Dr. Chow and, upon interrogation, finally gets the answer as to why the humans experimented so cruelly on his family and the other animals and apes. Dr. Chow gives the honest if ugly answer: hubris, then accolades and funding. Even with their failures, Chow still believes the animals should be grateful for the gifts humans gave them. Hammond disagrees. Even if improvements came, they were through inflicted suffering. In his words, making the humans thoughtless gods. Interrupted by the sound of a laser saw, Hammond realises Chow has just been stalling him all this time, although he has got the answers he seeks. Threatening her death, he sees fear in her eyes and that she is lying when she says she's not afraid to die. He escapes the guards using his full kit of abilities as we know in game, retrieves the components he came for, and rolls into the night. Realising that revenge for him won't be enough now. He wants to make Lucheng pay for what they did. In his words, tear it all down. Back in the outback, as the Junker Queen sips her morning coffee with Merry and Geiger, head of the Tinkers and Scavengers, by her side, some dust in the distance signals Hammond's return. The Queen asks no questions, and Hammond wouldn't give the answers anyway, Upon saying he's got the thrusters, he's admitted back into Junkertown again. Here's some details I really enjoyed in the story. The first thing I enjoyed from this story was just the world building, the wider plot, feeling in of the past of characters while telling a story that moves things forward as well. This story is from Andrew Robinson, who writes for the Blizzard Central Franchise Story Development team. They work on things like the cinematics, a lot of the wider media properties, in conjunction with the specific Overwatch narrative team. Andrew's done some writing on a chunk of comics, a chunk of the animated shorts as well, so it's cool to see him back in action here. From the very beginning, we see comments on and context for perhaps some of the outlandish designs of Outback Omnics that we've seen in Junker Queen's origin story, The Legend of the Junker Queen. Now, I thought that these were kind of maybe hyper-exaggerated enemies, or perhaps Junker Queen telling a big story about her exploits. From the very beginning, as the Junkers pick through the mechanized bodies of the Omnic band they've just destroyed, these Omnics have apparently terrorized the Outback since the aftermath of the crisis, and they're different. They're not like the Omnics the wider world is used to. Something about the desert, the radiation, the heat, perhaps their extraordinary insularity has twisted them into something else. Wilder, bigger, aggressive, and totally unpredictable, except in their unceasing hostility towards the Junkers. The Queen snorts as she takes note of a downed Omnic with 5 upper limbs. Sometimes arms race is literal. And this insularity of both the area around the Australian Omnium and the Junkers is commented on several times in this story in other ways too. Lucheng Interstellar had no idea that Hammond actually survived the ape uprising on the moon until they actually found this sort of war room with broadcasts and monitoring of the null sector invasions around the world. The Junkers had no idea that the world was even under attack by the sounds of things. In a world as connected, as futuristic as Overwatch is, it's kind of miraculous that the Junkers have carved out this area of Australia that's theirs. There's a wasteland around it that it seems even the Australian government and civilization, quote unquote, as we know it, doesn't really go into, and the two kind of almost live independently of each other. We also see, in terms of world building, more about Junkertown society. We see Mary, head of the Tinkers, we see Geiger, the head of the Scavengers, and we actually see how kind of the different aspects of society function together, particularly when they're out on the job. There's a nice little section as Hammond watches everyone getting into action as they go about dismantling wreckage in the aftermath. The wreckers use everything from axes to backhoes to tear everything apart. Scavengers sort through it, trying to find textiles, rare metals and other pieces, and then they barter it through with the Tinkers, who triage it for value and whether it can actually be used. So everyone coming together as a team effectively, albeit with some squabbles, to get the job done. Outside of the Junkers, it's also great to see a bit more about the Apes on the Moon and the Lunar Colony, what they've been up to and how things happened. Now, fascinatingly, at the end of his conversation with Dr. Chow, Hammond actually notices, as he's looking at the security feeds, that something has been built on the Lunar Colony. Hammond turns back to the feed that looks out at Earth and suddenly realises what has thrown him off about the view. There is a structure outside that glassine wall that was not there all those years ago. It is only partially built, but it is not something the scientists made. Since the Ape Uprising, we know that they have thwarted several Lucheng Interstellar attempts to try and take back the base. Now, Lucheng has been throwing teams at this over and over again, always better equipped, and the Apes, in their words, have been innovating themselves too. At one point in their discussion, in Hammond's interrogation, Dr. Chow throws up a feed of a training facility, a big multi-level gym, and 2 apes are sparring in a ring. Hammond recognises a beefy orangutan who used to bully him for the pleasure of it. That's Dyson, now older, thicker, and he has fashioned armour and weaponry for himself. Although in their sparring, Dyson is beaten by another ape called Oscar, the progress that these apes have made is clear. They continue to train and drill themselves, and who knows what they're building on the moon. That's a fascinating one. Now, as far as we know, the apes went and destroyed pretty much, Hammond says in this story, all of the means available for people to escape, so the scientists couldn't get away. All of the escape pods, all of the ships and things were disabled, and the apes haven't been able to leave the moon since, although they have been able to operate the base to ensure their survival. Now, once Hammond has heard Dr. Chow's, if not confession, then an explanation of sorts, he sends a signal to the apes before fleeing, saying, "You are being watched," and playing a recording of Chow's voice when she said that they experimented on the animals for hubris alone to start with, because in their words, they could. Now, given that the apes killed some of their scientist captors, I'm pretty sure this is not going to put them in any better a frame of mind when it comes to humanity, but Hammond has tipped them off that not only are they being watched, but someone on Earth knows about their plight and situation as well. Going to be fascinating to see if the Apes on the Moon get a continued story as well, so stay tuned for that one, who knows. Next up, we really, in this story, delve into Hammond's past, but although we've known a lot of the sort of big key points and facts, this puts a lot of colour, a lot of feeling, and a lot of personality behind Hammond's story, what happened to him, and what has made him the hamster stroke scrapyard champion that he is today. Now in the story we hear a lot about how he was experimented on, but how his life started. Him being happy, him being comfortable with his family, him then sadly being jabbed with sharp tiny sticks, as he puts it. Who knows what he was injected with and experimented on with. He actually even says at one point each interaction was more than he could bear. He really suffered, as no doubt did all of the other animals during this testing. He was known as Specimen 8. He became aware that he was being experimented on, and there's a really sad bit where it's written that he realizes that he's more than his family, that he's changed, and he feels very lonely because of this. He tries to look into the eyes of his mother and realizes that there's a big gap between them now, and it's not one that can ever be walked back. Hammond very rapidly understands English, but he can't speak. He watches his siblings being injected too, and sadly sees many of them die, and wonders why the humans are not sorry or remorseful. He cannot understand. He also sees, when he has escaped, when he looks through vents, other creatures being experimented on, and the results of these experiments. In his words, it made every hair on his body stand up with their wrongness. So when Hammond sees how he has been treated, how his family has been treated, when he sees how other animals have been treated, then you can see with this, and of course his perceived rejection by Winston, why he's so angry at Lucheng Interstellar, Dr. Chow, and perhaps even more than that. We also, of course, hear a lot about Hammond's breakout in more detail, of him hiding a bobby pin in his cheek, breaking out with that and a screwdriver that he'd left around, and him never being taken captive again, slowly educating himself by night, experimenting and teaching himself in the garages, and also, amusingly, leaving presents, quote unquote, for Dr. Patel in his room. Yuck. Now, I also really enjoyed, it is part of Hammond's past, but I wanted to call it out specifically, the more detail and insight we get into the relationship between Hammond and Winston, their friendship and Hammond's feelings afterwards. They have met after Hammond has already escaped and has his run of the base and is living in the vents. Now, the story is specifically told, they kind of surprise each other and scare each other. At this point, Winston isn't able to articulate and speak English either, and Hammond has sympathy for Winston. He sees on his suit, similar to the one that Hammond is wearing, the number subject 28, and assumes that he has been through the experimentation and the testing that Hammond has. Hammond gives him a peanut butter bar from the commissary, and also, after he tightens up a loose screw on his bed, Winston is amazed by the screwdriver and takes it and wonders what it is, so Hammond actually gives it to him before he leaves. They're both alone, they're both outcast from the others of their kind. Hammond can no longer relate to and talk to his family. Winston has been specifically bullied or ignored by the rest of the apes, perhaps due to his advanced intelligence or differences. He is in isolation when Hammond meets him because the scientists are trying to reset the social boundaries of their experiment. Although it's summed up very quickly, we understand that Hammond actually mentors and teaches Winston how to repair things, how to create things. And an important detail, before Hammond has met Winston, he is already working on his method of escaping the lunar colony. So Hammond's escape plan is already in motion before Winston has even been taught how to use his first screwdriver. We also learn that when it's time to escape, when the apes are rebelling and bad things are happening to the scientists, Winston is seen by Hammond to be going without him. He reacts to a noise from Bay 14 and stealthily makes his way there. He stops seeing a figure. 28, Winston, working furiously on an escape craft, nearly ready to leave. It looks like it's based on the plans they dreamed up together, the rocket they would one day leave the colony on. The ape makes a final adjustment to a familiar rocket thruster, closes its compartment and heads for the cockpit. Hammond is confused, and then hurt and angry. It seems Winston does not plan to bring Hammond. So, although Hammond escapes to Junkertown and escapes to Earth and spends his time amongst the Junkers, finally revealing himself to the Queen and a few other people, he never actually tries to contact Winston or goes beyond that. And Chow notices this in their conversation. She says that Hammond spent so long trying to escape his cage and help others escape theirs, he's still hiding in a cage of his own making in his wrecking ball and in Junkertown rather than confronting Winston or getting any answers on that front. Now Hammond growls at this and says nothing, perhaps acknowledging some truth in it, but who knows, perhaps the Queen's special flying project he's working on will change all that in the future. In terms of other stuff that was really cool, it was great to see more about Dr. Chow and Lucheng Interstellar's work and generally what they do in the Overwatch world and what they've been up to on the moon in space, and not Mars just yet, but maybe we'll learn about that a bit more with Juno coming to Overwatch 2 soon. Now, for as long as Lijiang Tower has been around, many people have enjoyed speculating about the wheelchair in one of the offices on the control centre map. And we meet its occupant after all this time, Dr. Chow, the same Dr. Chow that experimented on Hammond, now head of Lucheng Interstellar, and with her body and muscles, in her own words, atrophied by being too long in space and lunar gravity, no amount of physio would be able to help her get back to the way that she was. From the very beginning of the story, the Chinese government is putting resources into protecting Lijiang and Lucheng, because if their technology apparently got into Null Sector's hands, then the current worldwide crisis might become a whole lot worse. Now, Lucheng Interstellar's creation of and running of the Horizon Lunar Colony gave them a lot of free reign in what they actually did up there, and it seems that there was no real regulation in a lot of the experiments. Dr. Chow says it herself to Hammond. We were curious as to the limits of our ability to see what we could accomplish with genetic manipulation. You'd be surprised at what we tried. You barely saw a portion of it, and I admit our failures were horrific. That's why we could only do it up there. Can you imagine if any had escaped down here? So if the horrible things that Hammond saw through the vents as he was roaming around the base were only a fraction of it, then Lord knows what was going on. One wonders, for example, if any visiting scientists had any ethical questions about this. We know that Sibrin de Kuiper, or Sigma, of course, visited there for a short period of time, visited Dr. Harold Winston, a friend of his, and let's not forget, although we see Harold Winston as being quite sort of caring and nurturing towards Winston, he is a part of the team doing all of these kind of experiments, unless he wasn't aware of it, which seems at the moment pretty unlikely. Now, after the base fell to the Ape Rebellion, Hammond is curious. Obviously, he hasn't really known what's been going on. He wants to know why trillions of dollars of resources have been lost, if, in Hammond's words, they couldn't take the colony back from the apes. Now, Chow turns around and says, oh, they've tried. Believe us, we've tried. They've sent 3 teams up in the last decade to retake it, each better trained and better armed than the last. What we didn't realise, she admits, was how damned clever the apes are. They saw us coming, and while we were innovating, so were they. So we don't know if they're all as smart as Winston or Hammond, for example, but a whole bunch of apes with very, very high intellectual levels. Who knows what they've managed to achieve? But whatever they have managed to achieve so far, it seems that the apes haven't been actually able to escape or create themselves things, whether they're because they lack the materials or raw resources or some technology to actually get off the moon at this point. The other thing that we learn from this story is that Lucheng still used the telescope on the Horizon base, and they have control of that. It was originally used for keeping an eye on perhaps extra universal or faraway threats, things such as large asteroids. That kind of work is done by space telescopes in our day and age. Now, interestingly, over the last decade, as Lucheng have been trying to take back the moon, as it were, we also know that at some point they lost contact with their mission on Mars. That's Juno's origin story. Hopefully we'll get a bit more of that when she releases in Season 12 of Overwatch 2. So a vastly competent company at one point who was really operating in very morally shady ways beyond the oversight of perhaps global, of perhaps traditional, of perhaps earthbound ethics. Interestingly, Chow feels that Hammond should be grateful. It shows kind of her character, her hubris, her sort of perhaps amorality in this situation. Pretty sure Dr. Chow and Moira would probably get on. Chow surprises him. You didn't know what that work laid good ground for, the long-term effects of low gravity on animals. I mean, Chow, with her being wheelchair bound is a case in point. The viability of sustained life on the moon. We thought it was all about Earth, lunar operations, but then the scope of our project changed. The apes and you, if you live long enough, would become part of a long-term space travel program. Now that does sound like they were going to try and send hamsters, apes, other animals like into deep space, which again, perhaps instead of humans isn't the most moral thing in the world either. Maybe they'd be designed or intended to be assistants to humans on long space travel missions. Either way, at the moment, Lucheng Interstellar, given that Lijiang is under attack, given that the world is bathed in this null sector invasion right now, probably have bigger priorities, their own self-defense and existence, for one. But it'll be interesting to see in future, obviously with Juno's arrival and her origin story, but also with Hammond being out there in the world, whether these perhaps problems that happened on the moon in a more peaceful time come to light. What will Lucheng do next? What is going on Mars? Many questions to be asked there, but many cool details of not only humanity's efforts in space, Lucheng's efforts in space and on the moon, the backstory of Winston, the backstory of Hammond, and many different pieces and cool pieces of world building coming together in the Overwatch universe with this story. So yeah, really enjoyed it for multiple different reasons. And last and by no means least, well, what's next? What could come next? Well, from this story, we've learnt a lot about an ongoing story, as it were, the Junkers' effort to repair this jewel in the crown, this Queen's Pet project. Probably, my speculation, given that it was found in the husk of the Australian Omnium, some kind of perhaps, let's say, First Omnic Crisis era dropship, flying ship, something like that. Maybe one of the mobile production factories that we've seen, similar to with Null Sector using those recently. There must be some blueprints. There were effectively flying ships with many sort of Omnics on them in the first Omnic Crisis. So maybe this is some old technology that will get the Junkers airborne, and as I said in the other one, a friendly rivalry when we were covering the other short story to do with Junkrat and Roadhog that kind of is the prelude to this. A Junkers World Tour could be something again. The Junkers could go out, perhaps led by the Queen. Maybe they're going to try and beat back Null Sector. Maybe they're just going to try and beat back anyone who gets in their way. Who knows? Maybe there's just a bit of looting to be done. But it'll be fascinating to see what the Junker Queen and company get up to next. Another potential thing that could happen next in the future, how about a Hammond and Winston reunion at some point? Now, Hammond, as we know from this story, has never confronted Winston. He doesn't know why Winston left without him. He assumes that it's because Winston isn't actually his friend. Maybe there's a good reason for that. Maybe Winston probably doesn't know Hammond is alive either. It's more than possible. Really, the only time that we know someone probably has spent some time in Junkertown is Anna, from various bits and bobs to do with her lore and voice lines and things that have come through. But that was since her disappearance, of course, in the events of her comics. So who knows, if the Junkers go on a bit of a world tour and maybe they try and sort of save Sydney or something, they fly into Sydney on their dropship and try and beat back Null Sector just as Overwatch are turning up in the same city, well, that could be the Winston Hammond reunion. I'd love to see how that goes. That could be a really cool story to tell in future. And last but not least, just another thing that could happen, the Moon Apes, Winston's brothers and sisters, or certainly peers. Now, maybe, just maybe, as I said before, when the Null Sector invasion, or Omnic Crisis 2, depending on how you want to describe it, is done, there'll be a reckoning somewhere or another. Maybe, what are those apes building on the moon? Maybe, just maybe, they're going to find a way off the moon themselves. Are they going to come to Earth? Could be likely. Or perhaps, maybe Lucheng try and head up there. Maybe Winston tries to head up there at some point to be a broker, a peacekeeper after this Null Sector invasion is done. Maybe the moon at some point is vital to beating Null Sector, and some of the gang have to head up there. That could be an interesting link. And just what are the apes building that is beyond the barriers of the original Horizon Lunar Colony base? Who knows, but can't wait to find out in future. There we go. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like this video, throw a like, subscribe, comment. Did you enjoy this story? Have you enjoyed the Heroes Ascendant stories? Where would you like to see all of these cool plot threads and things go next? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do just let me know. And if you'd like to check out more Overwatch lore, interactions, short story analysis, voice lines, everything to do with Overwatch's world, universe and story of its characters and much more, then please do check out these playlists here covering out content for the last 8 years or so of Overwatch. I'm slowly dipping my toes into some other games, world stories and universes, both in video games and beyond, that I enjoy, so do check out some of my other content here. Would love to know what you think as well. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.